Well, I have quarter two, so we'll get started here. Hello and welcome everyone. This session is being recorded. My name is Eric Pelosi and I will be the moderator of this ADEIL conference session. Thank you for joining us for utilizing micro-affirmations to support online students. AEIOU and you can too. Please welcome Dr. Audrey Heron.
Thank you so much, Eric. I will say that I love presenting at ADEIL because the moderators are so welcoming. And that's not just a plug. I just really, for those of you who are joining us, Eric did his job and made sure he knew how to pronounce my name, was very intentional about asking me how I wanted to handle questions and those kinds of things. And so ADEIL is just always a fun conference to present at because of the networking opportunities, but I always have a really good moderator. So Eric, I appreciate everything you've done to make me get set up and feel comfortable today. And so like Eric said, my name is Dr. Audrey Heron. And so I won't go into a long introduction. And after I kind of viewed this presentation this morning, I kind of thought, yikes, that was a big picture to put up of myself on the screen there. But just so everyone can see what I look like, because I know sometimes in the Zoom meetings, your face is kind of small whenever the presenter is sharing a screen. But I put in some links, but I did include a QR code. So if you're following along in the audience and you're one of those who has a mobile device or a tablet and you'd like to scan this code, this will actually take you to the link for the presentation. I also dropped the presentation link and my contact information in the chat, but depending on your settings, we may not everybody, if you're joining us after that, may have access to that. So at the end, I'll try to go ahead and remember to post that information in there as well. And I'll give everybody just a few more seconds in case you want to scan that code. If you do scan the code and you get the presentation or you follow the link that I drop at the end, there's just some links out here so you can find out more about ASU and our department, our RAM fam, and my contact information is there as well. Anytime I like to present, I also like to kind of let you get to know me a little bit before we dive into the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So just a couple of fun facts. I do work for Angelo State University, and I'm actually an ASU alumna myself. I earned my bachelor's and my master's degree from Angelo State, and I also earned my doctorate from Texas Tech. I have I'm just shy of 10 years in higher education, and all of those years have been in the online setting. And I am the mom of 2 wild boys and the wife to 1 wild coach. So here are some pictures of some of the things we like to do on our adventures. And just a quick plug for me, something I'm super proud of. I actually am a 2-time recipient of TextDLA's Outstanding Commitment to Education and Innovation in Distance Education. So there's the very nice picture my university made me take for the news release. And I actually won that as part of a member of my team at my institution in 2021, and then as an individual in 2022. And so just to give you a little background into kind of the rationale or how this AEIOU framework came about, I really have, like most of us who are in higher education, most of us that are educators, we're lifelong learners. So we're always looking for new ways to really keep our teaching practice fresh and really allow us to keep learning as we're teaching others and really try to find ways to model for them how to be that lifelong learner and how to seek out ways to try new things and not be afraid of stepping out of the box and taking some risks that may not work out the way that you intend. And I really just wanted to be one of those professors that was really seeking continuous improvement and not just kind of settling into a rut. I often get kind of bored also. So I think that my online setting really lends itself to me practicing with some new tools, because as we know, post-COVID especially, the online learning world and the mediums and technology and the best practices that this research tells us that are really good for us, they're basically changing on the daily. And so it's very difficult to keep up because of course we want our students to be engaged, we want to support them, we want them to be satisfied with their learning experience, but we also really need to have a little bit of fun at work. And that's what I really want wanted to have. I am very big about work-life balance. I put a lot into my teaching. I put a lot into my students so that I can feel good about that, and I want them to feel good about that. But I also want to have time at home with my family and do the things that I want to do. And I think a lot of us in education, especially online, because we're kind of on 24/7, right? We have students that work in the evening and they may email us at 9 p.m. and they expect that immediacy, right? And part of us wanting to be a good teacher really wants to give them that immediacy. So I wanted to have some fun, but I wanted to be practical, and I really wanted to strive for some techniques that would allow me that work-life balance. So again, in my doctoral program, one of my professors was really big on making it practical. He said, there's all this research that goes out, but do the teachers in the classroom really read that stuff, or can they really implement that? And even as a teacher myself, whether I was in K-12 or in the higher ed setting, I'd go to these professional developments and I'd say, wow, like that's really cool. But then I would kind of forget about it, and none of that would actually make it into my day-to-day practice. So I wanted something that was easy to implement. It was very basic and practical, and something I could communicate to others, as well as keep fresh on my mind in my daily practice. And just to give a little bit further rationale, again, here's another plug for myself, a little something about me. I did recently publish a framework, and this AEIOU is just a piece of this layered framework that I kind of designed. I am a big believer in student motivation and how that impacts positively the learning environment and their success. And so I really subscribe to all the motivation theories. I like all of them, but I did my dissertation on self-determination theory. So those of you who went through dissertation, you know that those things are really fresh on your mind when you first get out. And so what I did is I tried to think about, in self-determination theory, what are those things that I can do in my classroom that are going to support autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And today in this presentation, we're going to talk about mostly relatedness, because we're going to talk about affirmations and really creating value by being intentional in the communications and interactions that we have with our students. And that relates to that relatedness factor in our motivation, self-determination motivation theory. So I just wanted you to have some frame of reference that this is one little aspect of the framework that I try to implement in my daily teaching practice. And also, if you follow the link, there's actually a link to this framework in case you want to learn more about that. All right, so again, to the meat and potatoes of the presentation. So of course, the title of my presentation is utilizing micro-affirmations, and I'm going to give you a basic framework. It's an acronym, AEIOU, to try to be intentional and integrating those in your teaching practice. But before we talk about micro-affirmations, I really want to start by kind of going over microaggressions, because I feel like microaggressions is something we hear way more about. I know in my readings that I do, in my professional developments, and some of the webinars that I do, I hear a lot about micro insults, microaggressions, but I don't hear as much about micro affirmations. So I'm sure all of you are pretty aware of what microaggressions, particularly in education, but also in the workplace and society are. But just to give us a working definition as we move through the presentation, a microaggression is basically an everyday exchange that cues a sense of subordination based on any of one of a number of social identities. And you can look at the list there. Now, an example of an explicit microaggression might be using some outdated language or some stereotypical language. But more implicitly, which I think is what a lot of us, especially in the online setting, might run into unintentionally, is just providing more opportunities for student perspective, whether that be in speaking out in class or in the content that we provide, the examples that we provide, those kinds of things. And those can be really implicit, so you may not realize that you're doing them. One thing, I know that it's not necessarily goes with some of this definition, but one thing I catch myself doing is I use a lot of examples in my class. So I'll pull from a peer, somebody that's actually learning alongside them. And if they do a bang up job, then I will post that. with permission from the student and say, you know, Sally did a wonderful job on this assignment. Well, what usually happens in a lot of classes? Sally's probably a pretty good student, so every week she probably does pretty good work. And I may be giving her more opportunities to feel that validation and feel that shout out and that experience of being a stellar student, and may not be giving some of those opportunities to some of the students that worked really hard. And so I really try to temper that and balance it. Maybe it's not the highest grade in the class that I get, but it's this person put in a really good effort and I've seen it growth. So I want to allow that for them as well. And so I really would like you to also think about broadening your definition of what a microaggression can look like, so that you kind of have that in mind as we go through as well. Now, microaggression, of course, you know, is related to those other terms that I mentioned before, like micro assault or micro insult. But basically, intent is the big factor here, because often these are unintentional, but the consequences of them can be very dire. Across a variety of manifestations, microaggressions have been negatively associated with student well-being and success. And what do we want as educators? Of course, we want them to learn. We want them to pick up those student learning outcomes, but we also want them to have a good sense of well-being and feel safe in that learning environment, because if they feel safe, they feel like they're validated and they're valued, then they are going to feel more confident in taking those risks that we often need them to take in order to reach those higher level learning outcomes. So again, intent is key. So unintentional microaggressions are the root of so much lost confidence, unmet potential, and alienation. But we need to ask ourselves if intentional acts of micro-affirmation can foster that inclusion, boost self-worth, and help employees, this is the quote here that I use because I wanted to credit my source, but help our students achieve their full potential. And so as we go through here, I really want us to kind of focus not only on avoiding microaggression, because I think there's a lot of research out there and a lot of practical strategies you can do to avoid the microaggressions. But I think we need to really revert our thinking and also thinking about being intentional about embedding those micro affirmations. So it's kind of a two-part process. It's not just avoiding those aggressions, but it's embedding those affirmations. So to give us just a working definition of micro-affirmations, it's really just about creating value. It can be a really small acknowledgement of another person's value. So you really want to highlight to that student that their learning, that them as a person is valuable to you, and that they are valuable to that learning environment and to your institution. So before we get into the framework, there's just a couple of, there's actually 3 tangible actions that you can kind of have in mind as we go through that AEIOU framework. The first is active listening. And I think that one is very logical to understand. People like to be heard. They like to be understood. And so I think we all kind of know what active listening is. But when you really think about it, especially in the online learning environment where so much of our communication can be text-based, we really sometimes need to back up and we need to ask for more information. So there's often times where students will email me and they will ask me a question about, you know, some of the assignment content or where to locate a resource, or explain that they're having some difficulties. And I may feel like I understand, but I may need more information. And what I often find is that a lot of instructors will go for the easy answer instead of digging more. And so what I will say is, don't be afraid to ask them for a little bit more information. We don't have to pry. We don't have to get into their personal life. But if we feel like we need that information to better support them, then we need to make that extra step so that they feel like they're heard. And a lot of times that will go a long way with a student, because they'll say, thank you for taking the time to ask me more about this situation. And it often opens up like, oh, I thought it was just about this, but it's now about this. And there's been many times where I've asked those follow-up questions and it's really about the academic content. Then I find out they're struggling with something personally. And then I, as the instructor, ethically and legally, I don't need to become their counselor in that situation, but I can refer them to our counseling services or to our BIT team or to other resources that could perhaps help them. And if I had to ask those follow-up questions, I would never know they were having those issues. And so active listening is very important, even if it's through text, email, those kinds of things. And also just recognizing and validating experiences. This goes a long way with my students. To give you some background, I teach graduate level. So the students that I have are all adult learners. There are almost all of them are working full time in the education field already. They're working towards school counselor certification, principal certification, advanced teacher, and they all have families or personal lives and responsibilities that they're balancing. So I noticed that they have a really kind of a different experience, whereas, you know, those undergraduate students, we see their experience and the struggles they have as new higher ed students. Then you see that graduate level struggle. And so just to give you an example of just kind of recognizing and validating experiences, this fall A term, I teach 8-week terms. So I had a fall A that I just wrapped up. And I noticed that in my 2 courses that I was teaching, I just had a lot of low grades. And, you know, I think we've all been teachers long enough where you just get those groups sometimes where it's like, okay, nobody's getting it. And we just have a low group, and that's okay, that happens. But not only were they were kind of performing at the lower level that is not typical on some of the assignments that they were scoring low on, but I saw an increased request for extensions, a longer delay between communications if I would email them to, you know, try to engage with them. I was just seeing a lot of struggle. And I even had a lot of them reach out to me and say, you know, I'm struggling with this, or I'm having a hard time with this. And so it was really a trigger to me to think, okay, this is kind of a widespread issue. This is not a couple of isolated students. This is a lot of my students. So in one of my debrief videos that I did for the week, I kind of push out videos weekly. I recognized that. And I told them, hey, I've even talked to some of my colleagues in the department and they're seeing the same things. So you know what that tells me is that this term was just hard for whatever reason. It was hard, whether you experienced a struggle personally or professionally. And then I kind of shared some of my experiences, some of my failures and some of my challenges that I even had as a doctoral student, being, you know, working full time, being a wife and having 2 young kids at home, and saying, I understand that experience. I validate that experience. That's very real. That's what you're going through. So if you need something, let's talk about that. And I'm available for that. And so just recognizing and validating can be so powerful. And when I tell you I had multiple emails after that video, not just 2 or 3, I probably had 6 or 7. And then I had a few more comments about that on my IDEA evaluations at the end of the term. They just really like to hear, even if I wasn't doing anything for them, they just needed to hear what you're going through is real. And we validate that. And so even on the basic level, that can be really affirming to them. And then the last tangible action is just affirming emotional reactions. And I think those are really easy to do when the student's reaction is positive. If they're happy, they're enthusiastic, they're excited about something, those are really easy to feed into. That's infectious to us as educators. But what's harder is to affirm those that can be difficult for us. If a student is angry, if a student is frustrated, or if a student is going through something that we get very connected to our students that we find emotionally reactive. And so you have to really kind of take a beat. And what I say is that I really love working in the online environment because most of the time, a lot of those interactions are going through email or going through discussion boards, are giving you time. So you are blessed with the virtue of time in online learning. So you can slow down. If someone is angry and they send you an angry email or an unprofessional email, you're not sitting face to face most of the time where you have to engage with that. You can take your time. You can say, you can put yourself in that student's position, kind of like Atticus Finch says in To Kill a Mockingbird, put yourself in their skin and walk around a little bit. Say, okay, this student has failed the last 3 assignments. They're working full time. It's testing season. They've got 3 kids. All of them are doing select sports. She's stressed out. Okay, now I know how to work with that. And you can take some time to do that. So sometimes just affirming, I understand that you're frustrated. I understand that you're angry. What can we do to work together to find some resolution? Now, along with those tangible suggestions to kind of move through with when thinking about micro-affirmations, there's also some things to consider. You should never put yourself to the side for your students' feelings because you can't pour from an empty cup. We tell our students that all the time. I teach learning school counselors, and we say you cannot give so much of yourself that you have nothing left, because the quality of your instruction, the quality of your engagement is eventually going to suffer. So you really need to monitor your feelings and ensure that you are okay whenever you're trying to affirm your students and support them. You also need to act naturally and be yourself. A lot of times when we think about affirmations, I think some people want to put on that act naturally and they want to kind of make a show of it. And if you really do not feel genuinely the empathy that you're trying to express, or you do not feel sincerely the affirmation or of their feelings or recognizing their experience, that often is really clear to the student. They can tell that you're putting on a show, and then at that point it has the opposite effect than you're really trying to achieve, because then they feel like you're phony. They don't feel like you're being transparent. And so really, to the best extent you can, be yourself and act naturally, and don't try to put on a show, and really just be yourself whenever you're trying to make these affirmations. So if you don't feel it, don't do it, because it probably won't come across the way that you want it to come across. And also just leave room to be wrong. There are times when I think, oh, I know exactly how this student is feeling, and I've been told, no, that is not how I'm feeling. And that's okay. I own up to that and say, oh, I misinterpreted that. I misunderstood. I thought it was this, but I want you to tell me more. I obviously don't understand. Let me be wrong. And there's times when I think my students need something. Say, I think they need an extra video this week, or I think they need a newsletter this week, and then nobody views it. Okay, well, that means I was wrong in that, and that's okay. Let's do something different and let's be flexible. So here comes the good part of the presentation, the AEIOU framework. And this is one of my favorite memes to use. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the movie Philadelphia with Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington, but Denzel Washington plays a lawyer, and his famous tagline is, you know, explain it to me like I'm a 4-year-old. And that's kind of what I like to do, and I like people to do with me when it's something I'm expected to do. I want to know the ins and outs. I want to know step 1, step 2. So hopefully that's what I'm going to give you today. So with the AEIOU framework, it's basically an acronym that kind of gives me an easy way to remember the 5 elements that I like to embed in my communications and interaction. The first is appreciation, then E for empathy, I, integrity, O for ownership, and U for that university connection. And so these are 5 levels that I have kind of found just anecdotally, that if I show my students that I have empathy for them, that I appreciate and value them, that I have integrity in my own practice, and that I am monitoring myself and trying to hold myself to the same standard I'm holding them to, that I own up to my own mistakes, but I also own up to my commitment and my responsibility in the learning environment, and that I also connect them and hopefully help them feel connected to the university. Those are some things that I found that have helped. Now, that university connection becomes important, especially if you are teaching students in an all online program like I do. They may never step foot on the physical campus of Angelo State University, but I still want them to feel like they are part of our university, part of our RAM fam. And so I try to build that in as well, because a lot of times these students feel like they're going through a degree program, but they're not really a student like other people are students who go to that brick and mortar building. That really just goes a long way to help me build trust with my students. And I'm really big on just being transparent and being open. I don't want there to be any hidden agendas, or for my students to think there are any hidden agendas. And if you like the idea of transparent teaching practices, if you haven't heard of the TILT project, which is the Transparency in Learning and Teaching, it's got some really good basic strategies as well to just make your assignments and your teaching practice transparent. And so I encourage you to look out further there if you like the idea of transparency. And this framework can be built into emails, to feedback, to your face-to-face or video conferencing interactions, your instruction, announcement, basically any engagement that you have with your students. There's a lot of opportunity there. So just to go over some examples for our appreciation. With appreciation, it can be really simple. I often have students who will email me and they kind of want to get it done. You know, that Dr. Heron, where are the resources for module 1? Thank you. And so I take that extra time and I say, Eric, Thank you so much for your question. I appreciate that you're looking ahead. And no matter what the question is, or, if they say, I'm so sorry, I think I'm going to be late on the assignment. I appreciate your communication and wanting to keep me in the loop. And that helps us make a plan for your success moving forward. And it's one or two extra sentences, but it kind of gets us out of that text-based mode, because I noticed that even some of my older students, they email like they're texting. And it's very short and it's very informal. And that gives us very little time and very little content, very little words to really try to engage with them. And I don't learn much about them in that way. When I open up with something like, thank you for your question, or I appreciate this communication, that gives me a little bit more to dig into the email. And that encourages them to respond back. And maybe that'll open up that dialogue a little bit just by using those little sentences. Sometimes in feedback, what I'll do is I notice that they're trying something different, even if they're not completely successful. I want to make sure that I show them that I appreciate that they're taking those learning risks, or I appreciate that they tried really hard to integrate those outside sources, or to, make an argument that they weren't sure they could defend. And so sometimes I'll put something like, I can see that you're striving to integrate those sources to support your argument. Thanks for your hard work. And it's just these little, again, micro affirmations. They probably worked really hard on that paragraph. They probably spent a lot of time on that paragraph. So sometimes for them to just see, hey, she noticed that I tried to do that, that can go a long way with the student. One other thing is, I won't read all the examples here to you, but I do a lot of remediation. I tell my students, I know I don't want to get you behind on the upcoming assignment that's coming up, but I really think we need to pause. I think there's a breakdown in the learning. I think we need to stop here. We need to discuss. That way you have increased opportunities for success. So sometimes they'll ask for a redo, or they'll say at the end of the term, I need some extra credit. And as teachers, it's very tempting for me to just say, okay, well, write this paper, or redo this assignment, and not really engage with them on the actual, what I want them to learn, right? Those objectives. There's more than one way to skin a cat. So obviously they didn't do well on the assignment I gave. Maybe they have some other ideas on how they can increase. So I open up those conversations and I tell them, I value your input. What are your ideas? How do you think that you can do this? These are also educators that I'm working with, so they have a little bit of knowledge about assessment and those types of things, but I make it to where that they feel like they are valued in those conversations, and it's not just a one-way street where I'm the teacher and I'm giving them this and expecting a product back. In terms of empathy, I think we all know what empathy is, and I think it's very easy. Educators usually have those, big hearts. We love our students, we care about our students and their learning. And so this one is pretty easy for us to feel, but I think sometimes it's difficult for some of us to convey. And so in my emails, I also really listen to them, when they're talking about, well, I have this going on at work. I have, the kids are sick, I have these kinds of things. I even had just an email just today who said, I plan on logging into the class, but I have pink eye. She works at an elementary school. So of course, that she gets pink eye about once a year, because that's how it was for me in middle school. But I said, I'm so sorry to hear that. And again, I validate that experience. I've had pink eye before, and I know how that goes. And so I hope you get some relief soon. And I just kind of put myself in that position. Sometimes it's easier whenever I've been through it too. I mean, I've had pink eye, so I can say, hey, I know what that's like. I know staring at a screen is probably not going to be really comfortable for you. So if you need some extensions, you need some help, let me know and we'll talk about it. And I just open up to say, I understand, I validate your experience. I'm going to hold you accountable, but I want you in that process too, so that we can come up with a way to make it work for you. I also really try to, open up those pathways and those avenues to say, if there's something going on, you don't have to tell me all the nuts and bolts, but tell me enough so that I know to help you, or I know that you're struggling. And some of them do. A lot of my students reach out and they say, I've got this going on, I'm going to try to be on time, or I've got this going on, so I don't know how well I'm going to do on the assignment. And so sometimes on their feedback, I'll tell them, I know you had a lot going on this week. I validate that experience. So although we've got some room for growth, growth, and I know that this score is probably not up to what your personal standard is, I'm impressed that you put in this effort and you demonstrated this level of effort on the work. So even though that you didn't get a good grade, or even though we've got to do some remediation here, I'm impressed that you even got it done, considering everything that you've got done. And so just validating their experience and appreciating their work and showing some empathy for what they're going through. So again, I won't read all the examples there, but there's another. Going on to integrity, again, I have kind of a welcome package I send out to some of my, or all of my students. It's a Google site and it's got information about me. But one of the things that's in there is my commitment to them as the professor in their course, as the instructor, and what commitment I want them to have. And I kind of call it our mutual commitment. I'm going to ask a lot of you, and I'm going to hold you accountable for this learning. And these are the things I expect on your end. But here are the things I'm going to do. These are this is my commitment to you, and I'm not going to hold you to anything that I'm not willing to do. So if there's other things that you think you need that I'm not providing in this learning environment, then we need to talk about that, because that's my commitment to you. So that's one thing I do at the very beginning of the term, to try to open up that pathway so that they see me as someone who's workable. You know, I may have those high standards, but I'm also flexible. We can also talk about ways to make sure that you're supported. And then I tell them, you know, that it's not just me, you know, trying to get good evaluations or trying to do those kinds of things. The experience in the course is really important to me. I want to work with them to find a solution, because in all actuality, even if I was really, really selfish about it all, if you have happy students, your term goes by pretty smoothly. You know, you have unhappy students, then the workload is really big on you. And so those students, if they're happy, they feel supported, that you can hold them to pretty high standards. And I'll tell you, I've had some students who say, you know, you are the hardest grader I have ever had, or you are the hardest teacher I have ever had, but I still had a good experience in your class. I mean, I have students who scrape by to make a B, or scrape by to even make a C, and they are still satisfied. Not all of them, but some of them, because I built that relationship with them and say, this is my job. My job's important to me, and I want you to be prepared. And if you are not showing that you can demonstrate these skills, I cannot ethically and with integrity give you scores that do not accurately reflect this learning. And we have those conversations, and it really goes a long way to show them that I'm trying to do my job, and for them to get their money's worth. I've shared with them before, you know, even in my master's or my doctoral program, there were times I signed up for classes and I never opened the book, and I thought, well, I just paid a few $1,000s and I got the transcript, you know, got the class over with, but what did I really gain from that? And sometimes you need those courses. Sometimes that's what you need to get through in life. But most of the time, you really want to get those skills to help you in whatever field you're going through. I also like to show them that I want to be ethical, and I want to show them that they're valued and that their comfort level in the learning environment their comfort level is important to me. So again, as I mentioned before, I often ask for examples if they do a really stellar job on an assignment, but I always tell them I will only share with your permission, because that's my job, is to make sure that you're comfortable. So I'll only share with your permission. And if you want, you can even redact your name, any identifying info. I can share anonymously, whatever you prefer, because your comfort level is important to me. And I also often offer an optional synchronous Zoom meeting. I teach all asynchronous classes, so I offer an optional synchronous meeting, and I record it, post it in the class for anyone who can't make it. And so before I hit record, I always say, please understand that this meeting's going to be recorded and posted. So if you're not comfortable having your camera on, you don't want to use the microphone, you can utilize the chat feature. You can just sit and listen. You can email me after, whatever it is to have your engagement, as long as you're comfortable. And so I just try to highlight that I try to act in integrity in all of my teaching practices as well. The next one is ownership. Again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I kind of own up if I made a mistake, but I also own up if something I'm doing is not really having the effect that I want it to have. I go through some 8-week terms and it's like, I have amazing view counts and everybody's watching the videos and everybody loves the videos. Then I have these other terms where it's like I have a class of 25 and I get 3 views on the video. And that just happens. And so I've done it before where I've said, I've noticed that, I'm paying attention. I noticed that not many of you are watching these videos. So instead of saying, watch the video that I create, I say, well, maybe that's not working for you. So how can I better support you? What method would better work for you? Instead of trying to force that into what I want them to do, I try to give them like some ownership of their own and say, hey, like, I think this would work better, Dr. Heron, because I don't have time to watch your videos, those kinds of things. I also just straight up make mistakes. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but this happened last term. I made a calculation mistake entering into the grade center, and a student, some student, you would not believe how many students are scared to question even something that they know is something as simple as a calculation error. But I had this student reach out and I went in, I verified, and I made sure I told them, I have verified this. You are absolutely correct. That was an error on my part and I've corrected it and I apologize for that error. Because we want to make sure that they know that it is okay to make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, and that's something that they should be doing with their students as well, right? We all have room to grow. There's another couple of examples there, but I'll go ahead and skip on down to the university connection. And again, from the time I started teaching online, there's been so much research out there that talks about how online students can feel disconnected, how they can feel isolated. And I think some of that, of course, can be remediated by their relationship with their instructor, their relationship with their peers in the class. But just as a little simple, again, a micro affirmation is just to tell them that they are a part of this university. They are a part of this institution. At Angelo State, we've got a really great, or what I consider to be a really great familial culture. We have core values that are embedded into our university. We call it our RAM fam. And so everybody who's a student or an alumni or a community member, we're all part of this RAM fam. And if you've never been on ASU's campus, if you've never been an on-campus student, you may not feel that. You may not know. Now, by virtue of being an alumna myself, I know a lot about ASU. I lived on campus for 2 years. So I'm able to embed some of those things and some of those little tidbits into my communications. But I try to also just go back to us being the Rams and Rambells. So in my signature line, I might sign off with Ram Pride, or go as a Ram, or a proud Ram fam member, or just some little thing that ties it back. Oh yeah, I am a student at ASU. We are the Rams, even though I've never been to an athletic event or something like that. In my videos, I'll wear an ASU shirt. Often it's a t-shirt, but it's an ASU shirt or my school colors. I'll have little ASU, stuff in the background, different stuff like that. And I even try to push out, like, hey, the counseling center is doing this really cool online webinar. This would be really good for y'all. Or did you know that the career development does a, job fair? Just little events that, oh yeah, I am a college student, even though I'm online and I'm graduate. I also, I'll skip down here. I wanted to also embed just a quick little example chart because I went through all these kind of longer examples, but I also wanted you, again, to have something practical and something tangible. And so there's a little chart there that has all 5 of those elements out and 2 examples of each. So they're kind of easy and you can kind of adapt them and modify them to fit easily within your practice, because in my experience, if it's not easy to implement, it's not practical, not easy to remember, you're not going to do it. And so here's a little basic chart for you as well of the AEIOU framework. But again, just to summarize, it's all about that added value. I try to do a lot of shout outs. We have a student-led networking forum that they can post questions in. If I see someone really like utilizing that really well, I might say, hey, Sally, great job getting us started in the class cafe. I know those questions really helped out a lot of us. Or Jim, thanks so much for giving me permission, to share your work. And even embedding those kinds of things in the communications can go a long way. And I also remind them, a lot of mine are teachers themselves, and I say, you talk a lot with your students probably about that growth mindset. So you remember to have that growth mindset here too. We may not be there yet, but we're going to get there. And if you need anything along the way, then I'm here. And I know it sounds a lot really easy because in education, we try to always call our students by their preferred names and know a little bit about them. But I'll tell you one little thing that has really helped me. At the beginning of the term, I would always go through the introductions and I'd have a sticky note and I'd say, okay, Sally, but she goes by Tara. And then I have Cynthia, but she goes by Cindy. And I'd keep it on, a sticky note on my computer. So as I'm typing to them or engaging with them, I'd call them by the right name. Our LMS has recently gone through an upgrade that they can now put in their own preferred name, which helps me out tremendously on the efficiency end. And I love that. But even through the introductions and the communications, I just note down some of the things. I think every term I have someone who's getting married or just got married or is having a baby or just bought a house or just started a new job. And I try to just make note of that so that when I send them an email and say, hey, thanks for your question. Also, I remember that you're getting married pretty soon. And I know it must be a busy time. So let me know if you need anything. And just taking those extra steps can really go a long way. Again, I mentioned that I kind of send out a welcome package, but I embed some of this up front in the course as well as throughout so that they kind of have it up front and they know what the expectation is from me on my end and them on their end. But I really try to, give them that appreciation, that integrity and empathy. I talk about taking care of themselves and how their health and their mental health is important to me and that they are connected to different resources from the university. So I give them like a list of resources. Yes, these are on our website, but I go ahead and give it to them here as well, just in case, because I may have students who never reach out to me and never tell me that they're struggling because they don't feel comfortable doing that. But if I give them the link to our counseling services or to financial aid or to food services, then they may get the help that they need, even if I don't ever find out that they do. We also have a social media. I also try to encourage some engagement there. So it's a little outside of the academic realm. But I basically just try to create value in all the steps that we take. Now, I know that I talk fast and furious and that we are almost out of time, but I did leave, I think, about 5 minutes for questions.
Yes, that's correct. So we have about 4 minutes left. So feel free if there's any questions from the group. Feel free to post it in the chat, or if you can unmute yourself, feel free to go on mic. And if we don't have any, I have one for you, Dr. Heron.
Okay, perfect.
So I work as an instructional designer, and sometimes I worry about, for instructors, they may have a full course. There's a lot of grading. They're really interested in how to get more engagement with their online learners and their online courses. And they may say something to me like, well, I want to test this out, but I don't have time to buy all 5 vowels. Give me 1 vowel to start with. If you were, to talk with me, maybe like an elevator pitch, or for an instructor to say, try this thread of these 5, try this out and see how it goes, to kind of get their buy-in and see what they think, what would you recommend?
I love that question. I love that question because I often kind of think about that. And sometimes in thinking, I'm like, okay, I only have 5, so maybe this other one is better. I always think about kind of reworking the framework. But I really do think that appreciation is probably the one that I get the most comments on, I think, because it's a little bit more, it's really versatile. It can be like, thank you for your communication, but it can also be, thank you for your hard work. And that kind of goes back to that validating of those experiences. I teach counselors, so we talk about feelings a lot. So I have students that reach out to me and they maybe express something. And I even tell them, thank you for sharing that with me, or thank you for trusting me with that information. So I think when we initially think about appreciation, we think of it as just kind of like, thanks for your email, and that's it. But there's so many different avenues that you could take. So I think I love that question, because if you're just getting started and you don't have time to buy into all 5, I would start with that, because to me, it's the easiest to implement, but it can be the most impactful.
Not really a question, but something I just appreciate, just kind of going off on that, of what a difference that makes as far as, from thanks for your email to thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's it's just that little tweak. It's not like we're reinventing the wheel. We're just getting just a little deeper and really adding some personalization. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I agree. I mean, I have students, we all know in teaching online that we've had students that I talk to them multiple times a week because they need that from me. They need that level of relatedness and that teacher immediacy. Then I have students that I never hear from and they're okay. But just, I've had students who even on my IDEA evaluation that they say, I never had to ask for anything, but just knowing that she was available made all the difference in the world. And so that appreciation of their presence in that learning environment, I think does go a long way. Oh, I love that. There's a comment there about adopt virtue with time. It is okay to pause before responding. And I will admit, I am not as good at doing that, even working in K-12. And then I was a counselor, I was an administrator, and it was very difficult. That I had a friend who once told me, physically bite your tongue. Physically bite your tongue until you are ready. Sit through that uncomfortable silence until you are ready and you know you can make a good response. And that was so difficult for me. And I can't tell you how many times that I will read an email and it'll either be upsetting to me, because sometimes my students do share with me very emotional things. And so I have to kind of think, how do I want to professionally respond to that, but also support them? But sometimes the comments, maybe they are frustrating or maybe they are annoying, and that doesn't need to come through to them. And so I love that. Yeah, we do have a lot of virtue with time in the online setting.
Unfortunately, we are at time right now, so thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Heron, for your presentation, and again for all of you for attending. We posted links to the presentation, Dr. Heron's contact information, and there's also the ADEIL conference evaluation form link there as well too. If you could take some time to provide feedback, we really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone, because I know this is a concurrent session. And so I feel really good that I had this many people show up, because I know it's a hard choice when there's so many good presentations.